Good evening. It is Saturday, 20th of May, 2023. I'm happy to say that I'm going to be sharing the saint for today because my priest friend loaned me another Butler's book. He'd asked me if I had recorded this before, and I meant to do it earlier in the year with another saint, but Lent and Easter got in the way, so it's now the actual feast day of Saint Bernardino of Siena, AD 144, and the font is quite small, but I'm determined to read it. And he marked the book with a lovely marker. I'm going to read that before I even say the prayers. It's lovely. For each cloud there is a rainbow, for each shadow the sun, for each parting memories, so our loved ones never truly are gone. Oh, that is so beautiful. It was marking the page where I have to read this evening. Well, I've done the mass readings for today because I was very disturbed in my spirit with the experiences I've had in the last 24 hours, because I have a peaceful existence and nobody troubles me and I don't trouble people. I just live quietly. So when people start causing strife in front of me, at me, or around me, or to people I care about, I don't like it. There's no excuse, you know. We live in a civilized society. So I'll put that behind me now. I'm going to pray two prayers before reading the saint's life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Prayer to my guardian angel. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom his love commits me here, ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Amen. Holy Michael, Archangel, defend me in this day of battle. Be my safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, I humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust down to hell Satan and all the wicked evil spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen. I'm reading from the Lives of the Saints by BUTLER'S, and this is the 20th of May, and the saint will be Saint Bernardino of Siena. I have to lean over it to be able to read it. Saint Bernardino was born in the Tuscan town of MASSA, MARITTIMA, in which his father, a member of the noble Sienese family of the ALBIZESCHI, occupied the post of governor. The little boy lost both his parents before he was 7 and was entrusted to the care of a maternal aunt and her daughter, both excellent women, who gave him a religious training and loved him as though he had been their own child. Upon reaching the age of 11 or 12, he was placed by his uncles at school in Siena, where he passed with great credit through the course of studies deemed requisite for a boy of his rank. He grew up a good-looking lad, so merry and entertaining that it was impossible to be dull in his company. But a coarse or blasphemous remark would always bring a blush to his cheek, and generally a remonstrance to his lips. Once, when a man of position sought to lead him into vice, Bernardino struck him in the face with his fists, and on a second and similar occasion he incited his comrades to join him in pelting the tempter with mud and stones. Even except when thus moved by righteous indignation, Bernardino was singularly sweet-tempered. Indeed, throughout his life he was noted for his unfailing affability, patience, and courtesy. At the age of 17, he enrolled himself, in a confraternity of Our Lady, the members of which pledged themselves to certain devotional practices as well as to the relief of the sick, and he at once embarked upon a course of severe bodily mortification. In 1400, Siena was visited by the plague in a virulent form. So serious was its toll that from 12 to 20 persons died daily in the famous hospital of Santa Maria della Scala, which found itself bereft of almost all who tended the sick. In this extremity, Bernardino offered to take entire charge of the establishment, with the help of some other young men whom he had fired with the determination to sacrifice their lives, if necessary, to aid the sufferers. Their services were accepted, and for 4 months the noble band worked tirelessly, day and night, under the direction of Bernardino, who, besides nursing the patients and preparing them for death, saw to everything and brought order as well as cleanliness into the hospital. Though several of his companions died, Bernardino escaped the contagion and returned home after the epidemic was over. He was, however, so exhausted by his labours that he fell an easy prey to fever, which laid him low for several months. Upon his recovery, he found that his immediate duty lay close at hand. An aunt named Bartolomea, to whom he was much attached, had become blind as well as bedridden, and to her he devoted himself as he had done to the plague-stricken in the hospital. When 14 months later God called the invalid to himself, it was in the arms of her nephew that she breathed her last. Free now from all earthly ties, Bernardino set himself by prayer and fasting to learn God's will as to his future. By this means he was led to enter the Franciscan order, the habit of which he received shortly afterwards in Siena. The house, however, proved too accessible to the novice's many friends and relations, and with the consent of his superiors, he retired to the convent of Colombeo outside the city, where the rule of St. Francis was strictly observed. Here, in 1403, he was professed, and here he was ordained priest. Exactly a year later, on the feast of the birthday of Our Lady, which was his birthday, and the anniversary of his baptism and of his clothing. History has little to tell us about the saint during the next 12 years. He preached occasionally, but his life was mainly spent in retirement. Gradually, he was being prepared by God for the twofold mission of apostle and reformer. When at last his hour had come, the way was made clear in a singular manner. A novice in the convent at Fiesole, in which the saint was staying, startled the community on 3 consecutive nights after matins by exclaiming, "Brother Bernardino, hide no longer the gift that is in you. Go to Lombardy, for all are waiting for you there." Reprimanded and questioned as to why he had thus spoken, he replied, "Because I could not help it." To Bernardino and his superiors, this seemed to be a call from on high, and he obeyed. He opened his apostolic career at Milan, to which he went as a complete stranger. Towards the end of 1417, but soon his eloquence and zeal began to attract enormous congregations. At the close of a course of Lenten sermons, before he was allowed to leave the city to preach elsewhere in Lombardy, he was obliged to promise that he would return the following year. At first he was hampered in his delivery by hoarseness and inability to make himself heard, but afterwards, as the result, he firmly believed, of fervent prayer to Our Lady, his voice became singularly clear and penetrating. It is impossible to follow him on his missionary journeys, for in them he covered nearly the whole of Italy, with the exception of the kingdom of Naples. He travelled always on foot, preached sometimes for 3 or 4 consecutive hours, and often delivered several sermons on the same day. In large cities, he frequently had to speak from an open-air pulpit, because no church could contain the multitudes who crowded to hear him. Everywhere he preached penance, denounced the prevalent vices, and kindled popular fervour by spreading devotion to the holy name. At the end of every sermon, he would hold up for veneration a tablet upon which he had written the letters IHS, surrounded by rays, and after telling the people to implore God's mercy and to live in peace, he would give them a blessing with the holy name. In cities torn by faction, he would heal deadly feuds, and would persuade men to substitute the sacred monogram for the Guelph or Ghibelline emblems that too often surrounded their front doors. In Bologna, which was overmuch addicted to games of hazard, he preached with such effect that the citizens gave up gambling and brought their cards and dice to be burnt in a public bonfire. A card manufacturer who complained that he was deprived of his only means of livelihood was told by Saint Bernardino to manufacture tablets inscribed with IHS, and so great was the demand for them that they brought in more money than the playing cards had ever done. All over Italy men spoke of the wonderful fruit of Saint Bernardino's missions, the numerous conversions, the restoration of ill-gotten goods, the reparation of injuries, and reform of morals. Nevertheless, there were some who took exception to his teaching and accused him of encouraging superstitious practices. They went so far as to denounce him to Pope Martin V, who for a time commanded him to keep silence. Just going to move that. I'm just moving my missile out of the way because this font is so little. I have to move this about a bit and have more space. Sorry about that. However, an examination of his doctrine and conduct led to a complete vindication, and he received permission to preach wherever he liked. The same Pope, in 1427, urged him to accept the bishopric of Siena, but he refused it, as he afterwards declined the sees of Ferrara and Urbino. His excuse was that if he were confined to one diocese, he could no longer minister to so many souls. In 1430, nevertheless, he was obliged to give up missionary work to become, just checking the page, Vicar General of the Friars of the Strict Observance. This movement within the Franciscan order had originated about the middle of the 14th century in the convent of Brogliano between Camerino and Assisi, and had only maintained a struggling existence until the coming of Saint Bernardino, who became its organizer and its second founder. When he received the habit, there were only 300 friars of the observance in all Italy. When he died, there were 4,000. Wherever he went on his missionary tours, fervent young men were drawn to the order with which he was identified, and pious persons, desirous of founding convents, offered to bestow them upon the observance. It was therefore right and fitting that he should be officially empowered to consolidate and regulate the reform. He accomplished this task with so much wisdom and tact that many convents passed voluntarily and without friction from the conventual to the observant rule. The original observants had shunned scholarship as they had shunned riches, but Saint Bernardino was aware of the danger of ignorance, especially in face of the ever-increasing demand for observant friars to act as confessors. He therefore insisted upon instruction in theology and canon law as part of the regular curriculum. He was himself a learned man, as may be judged from a series of Latin sermons which he wrote at Capriola and which are still extant, and also by the fact that at the Council of Florence, Saint Bernardino was able to address the Greek delegates in their own tongue. Important as was the work with which he was now entrusted, the saint longed to return to his apostolic labours, which he regarded as his only vocation, and in 1442 he obtained permission from the Pope to resign his office as Vicar General. He then resumed his missionary journeys, which led him through the Romagna, Ferrara, and Lombardy. He was by this time in failing health, and so emaciated that he looked like a skeleton, but the only concession he would allow himself was the use of a donkey to convey him from one place to another. At MASSA, MARITTIMA in 1444, he preached on 50 consecutive days a course of Lenten sermons, which he wound up by exhorting the inhabitants to preserve harmony among themselves and by bidding a pathetic farewell to his native town. Though obviously dying, he still continued his apostolic work and set out for Naples, preaching as he went. He succeeded in reaching Aquila, but there his strength gave out, and he died on the eve of the Ascension, May the 20th, 1444, in the monastery of the Conventuals. He had almost reached the age of 64 years, 42, of which he had spent as a religious. His tomb at Aquila was honoured by many miracles, and he was canonized within 6 years of his death. And the footnote at the bottom, if I can read it, it's even smaller than this, says the number of early Latin biographies of Saint Bernardino is considerable, and it must suffice to note that a detailed enumeration is supplied in BHL NN 1188 to 1201. Some are given in full, and extracts made from others in the Acta Sanctorum May volume. Excellent modern studies of the life and apostolate of the saint are numerous. The first edition of modern studies of the life and apostolate of the saint are numerous. The first edition, that by P. Thoreau Dangin, was published in 1896, translated into English in 1911. Others which deserve special notice were written by Dr. K. Heffel in German, 1912, by A. G. Ferrers Howell in English, 1913, by Father V. Facchinetti, 1933, and by Piero Bargellini in 1933, both in Italian, but the number of such works is great. A considerable amount of fresh material has been brought to light and printed in modern times, for the most of which see the Archivum Franciscanum Historicorum, more especially volumes. For a fuller bibliography, consult B. Stazowiski, Der Bernardin von Siena, 1931. A very pleasant English sketch is that of M. Ward, St. Bernardino, the People's Preacher. The 5th century of the saint's death, 1944, produced a number of new books, mostly in Italian. See the life printed in Nalla Lecta Bollandiano. So that's an interesting saint. And also this day we've got Saint Thalius, Martyr, 284, Saint Basilia of Basilissa, Virgin and Martyr, and Saint Baudelaus, Martyr. So we've got quite a lot of saints in here for this day. Saint Austragilius or Outril, Bishop of Bourges, and Saint Ethelbert, Martyr. I'll read him because he's British. Saint Ethelbert, Martyr, AD 794. The Cathedral Church of Hereford is dedicated in honour of Saint Mary and Saint Ethelbert, and this Ethelbert, who was venerated apparently for no sufficient reason as a martyr, was the son and successor of Ethelred as King of East Angles, which is where I live, in East Anglia. The young king, desiring to perpetuate his line, presented himself before his powerful neighbour, King Offa of the Mercians at Sutton Walls in Herefordshire, intending to ask the hand of his daughter Alfreda in marriage. According to the story, Ethelbert was received with outward courtesy, but after a few days was treacherously murdered for reasons of state. The St. Albans chroniclers, anxious to save the good name of their reputed founder, put all the blame for this assassination on the machinations of Offa's wife, Cynthaithra. Ethelbert's body was roughly buried on the bank of the river Lugg at Marden, his severed head being contemptuously kicked about. In consequence of a vision, the remains were afterwards taken up and buried in a fair church at Hereford, and the ill-used head is said eventually to have found a resting place in Westminster Abbey. Among the miracles reported at the victim's intercession was one at Belus Campus, no doubt Belcham Otton in Essex, where the parish church is dedicated in honour of St. Ethelbert and All Saints. His feast as a martyr is still observed in the dioceses of Cardiff, which includes Herefordshire and Northampton. It must be confessed that John Brompton, whose account is printed in Acta Sanctorum, May, is not a very satisfactory authority, but the Bollandists apparently had also before them a transcript of a manuscript account by Giraldus Cambrensis, which was hopelessly damaged in the Cottonian fire of 1731. There is, however, a later manuscript text of his life in the library of Trinity College, Cambridge, which is printed in the English Historical Review. There also Mr. M.R. James prints an anonymous passio from Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, MS 308, probably the oldest form of the Hereford story of St. Ethelbert that has been produced. For a description of these and other sources, see James from Edmund Bishop's notes on the English calendar in Stanton's Menology. It is clear that St. Ethelbert had a considerable cultus as a martyr. He was represented in the paintings at the English College in Rome. Consult further the account furnished in that undeservedly neglected work, W. B. McCabe's Catholic History of England, A.T. Bannister, The Cathedral Church of Hereford. So that's very interesting. I've been to monasteries in that area, Hereford, years ago. So tomorrow is St. Godric, born of poor parents at Walpole in Norfolk. Oh, I live in Norfolk, so maybe tomorrow. Should I... Yeah, I might read a little bit of it now because I might forget tomorrow to do it. It's a busy day, Sunday. Yes, St. Godric, 21st of May, AD 1170. St. Godric was born of very poor parents at Walpole in Norfolk, and in his youth earned a living by peddling in the neighbouring villages. As he improved his stock, he was able to go farther afield to the great fairs and cities. Then the spirit of adventure seized him, and he took to a seafaring life, which he pursued for 16 years. He made voyages to Scotland, Flanders, Scandinavia, and probably traded in the ports he visited. He was able to purchase a half share in one merchant vessel and a quarter share in another. The life was a rough one, with many temptations, and one chronicler refers to him as a pirate. But on a visit which he paid to Lindisfarne, he was deeply impressed by the account given him of the life of St. Cuthbert, whom he ever afterwards regarded with special veneration. He undertook a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, which had lately been captured by the Crusaders, and on the homeward journey he visited Compostela. After his return to England, he became house steward to a wealthy Norfolk landowner, but the retainers plundered the poorer neighbours unmercifully, and Godric gave up the post, partly because he could not induce the master to check this pillaging, partly because he himself had, knowingly or unknowingly, partaken of the booty. He then set out on 2 more pilgrimages, the one to the shrine of St. Giles in Provence, and the other to Rome, in the company of his mother, who, we are told, made the whole journey barefoot. We hear of him next in Cumberland, where he acquired a psalter, which he learnt by heart, and which became his most treasured possession. Having made his way eastward into the wilds of Durham, he fell in at Walsingham with a recluse called Aelric. Godric was permitted to join this aged hermit in whose company he spent 2 happy and fruitful years. Then Aelric died, and Godric made a second pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It was the last of his foreign journeys, for St. Cuthbert, in a vision, had promised him a hermitage in England. After a sojourn at Exdale and another in Durham, where he acted for a time as sacristan, he discovered the place of his dream, the midst of Bishop Flambard's hunting park on the River Wear, 3 miles from Durham. There at Finchale, in a forest which teemed with big and small game, he spent the remaining years of his life practicing mortifications which would have killed any but a very robust man. Shy creatures such as stags, hares, and birds were not afraid of him, nor did he fear wolves or snakes. All wild animals were his friends, disporting themselves in his company and fleeing to him from danger. He constructed first a wattle oratory and then a little church. As far as possible, he lived in silence and seclusion, but he was under the direction of the prior of Durham, who, besides supplying him with a priest to say mass in his chapel, would often send strangers to be edified by his conversation. Among his visits were St. Aelred and St. Robert of Newminster, and a monk called Reginald, who obtained from him, though with difficulty, the story of his early years, and wrote a biography, which is still extant. St. Godric was endowed with extraordinary powers, notably with the gifts of prophecy and a knowledge of distant events. He foretold the death of Bishop William of Durham and the exile, return, and martyrdom of St. Thomas Becket, whom he had never seen. He often beheld scenes that were being enacted far away, breaking off a conversation to pray for vessels in imminent danger of shipwreck. He also knew beforehand the date of his own death, which occurred on 21st of May 1170, after he had spent some 60 years in his hermitage. At a later period, there was built at Finchale a monastery, the ruins of which survive. St. Godric is the co-titular of a Catholic church in Durham. The monk, Reginald, records not only the words, but also the airs of 4 sacred songs, which he took down from the hermit's lips. Godric claimed that they had been taught him in visions of Our Lady, of his dead sister, and of others. They are in any case of great interest, as being the oldest pieces of English verse of which the musical setting has survived, and among the oldest to show rhyme and measure instead of alliteration. We have 2 distinct accounts of St. Godric, one written by Reginald of Durham, who had visited the hermit. This, which is preserved in different recensions, was printed by the Surtees Society in 1845, edited by Father J. Stevenson. The second, by Galfrid, is also the work of one who had himself seen him, and who had before him the memoir of Prior German, who had been St. Godric's confessor. This is printed in Acta Sanctorum May volume. I can't read the rest, it's too small. But there's some mention of the lost literature of medieval England, 1952. So that's it for the day. God bless you. Thank you for listening. I hope you love the saints as much as I do. I have got remiss since Lent and Easter, but now I can do a saint from time to time. I mean, not as much as I do the Bible, but the saints are important. We can learn a lot from their lives. God bless you. I'm sending you God's peace in abundance. May you always be happy and joyful in the Lord, and have a blessed, happy, holy weekend. God bless you. Thank you for listening and sharing and commenting. God bless. Bye-bye.